Hello, we are Luminate, and today we will be discussing our solution to improve management of assistive airway devices in neonates. Meet little baby Sammy. Sammy was born 12 weeks premature and cannot breathe on his own because he has underdeveloped lungs. Thus, as soon as Sammy was born, he was intubated so that he could receive assisted ventilation. He was then moved to the Neonatal Intensive Care Unit, or NICU, where Dr. Foster, a respiratory specialist, monitors him very closely. A patient that's intubated has an endotracheal tube, or ETT, inserted into the trachea. If the tube is malpositioned, there's a significant risk to patient safety. If an ETT moves to be too shallow, it can result in an unplanned extubation, or UPE, which occurs in nearly 18% of intubated patients. UPEs are associated with neurological damage and airway scarring, both of which lead to lifelong complications for patients. Alternatively, up to 50% of patients experience the ETT getting pushed too deep, resulting in an endobronchial intubation, or EBI, which can result in lung collapse or other damage to the airway. Thus, the tube must be placed within a safe region. However, this can be very difficult in neonates because the safe region is generally only 1 centimeter long. Thus, Dr. Foster must monitor the placement of Sammy's endotracheal tube very closely. She does this using daily chest x-rays to see if the tube has moved. While accurate, Dr. Foster doesn't like this method because it's time-consuming and exposes Sammy to excessive doses of harmful radiation. In addition to these shortcomings, x-rays also lack real-time feedback on tube position. Tube malpositioning can occur due to movements as simple as extension of the patient's neck. Thus, little Sammy's endotracheal tube can shift upwards and become dislodged or unintendedly extubated at any time. If clinicians are not alerted early enough, they will not be able to re-intubate before the patient becomes hypoxic, risking neurological damage and several other lifelong complications. Sammy is just one of 66,000 neonates that are intubated annually in the US alone. While neonates are considered the most high-risk intubated patients, there is also a large upside potential to entering this market because our technology would be impactful in the pediatric market as well, which accounts for an additional 74,000 patients annually in the US. Unplanned extubations are also the largest factor impacting cost of intubation. Patients who experience a UPE spend an average of 25 extra days in the NICU, resulting in excess costs of nearly $60,000. Taking these costs and combining them with the cost of additional procedures needed to mitigate the complications from tube malpositioning, this problem results in an estimated $1 billion of excess spending in the US annually. Thus, given the clinical and financial need we presented, clinicians need to continuously monitor ETT position to reduce complications from tube malpositioning. After performing extensive market research, we've identified X-rays, end-tidal CO2 monitors, and SonarMed as the major market competitors in this space. After evaluating these competitors against the criteria stakeholders have indicated are necessary to solve this problem and reach adoption, we've determined that none of these solutions do adequately meet these criteria. Thus, we've identified a window of opportunity where we can enter this market. Luminate does this by providing clinicians with a means of continuously monitoring ETT position, updating every second with an accuracy of plus or minus 1 millimeter without the use of daily x-rays. This adds significant value to our stakeholders because it allows changes in tube position to be adjusted at their onset, avoiding the complications associated with tube malpositioning.
By addressing all of our stakeholders' need criteria, Luminate offers unique value to hospitals, clinicians, and patients. These benefits include a decrease in cost per patient stay, complication rates, and radiation exposure, which ultimately increases revenue and improves clinical outcomes. The first part of our solution concept takes a standard ETT and modifies it by adhering an add-on device to the exterior of the tube. The second part of our solution concept is a sensor array with an adhesive patch that adheres to the patient's skin. The third part is the software that processes sensor data to provide clinicians with real-time updates on ETT position. Implementation of this technology requires connection of all three components to the same electrical source. Once connected, a signal will be emitted from the tip of the ETT to be detected by the sensor array and then processed and displayed. This display system will render the position of the ETT on the patient's original chest X-ray, allowing clinicians to receive updates on relative tube position in real time. When in the safe region, the display will indicate a green marker. However, if the tube moves outside, it will notify clinicians. The pricing model that we've come up with centers around a reusable sensor array and central unit which contains the software and display. The software will be sold on a subscription basis, while the modification kit containing the modified ETT and sensor adhesive will be sold as disposable components. To market our product, we will be targeting our users and hospital purchasers. Our users include neonatologists, respiratory therapists, nurses, and other clinicians performing intubation procedures, while our primary buyers are purchasing committees and level 4 NICUs across the US. We will target our users by making cold calls, attending professional conferences, and relying on word of mouth to gain popularity amongst clinicians. We plan on negotiating with payers where we will provide clinicians with opportunities to try our devices through sales representatives. Moving forward, we aim to interview more stakeholders, file a provisional patent, conduct a human factors usability study, and perform feasibility testing in benchtop and porcine models. Assuming we adhere to this timeline, we will have sufficient data to publish a design paper by December 2020 and file for a utility patent by August 2021. Thinking more long-term, we have identified a suitable predicate that will qualify us for the 510(k) regulatory pathway. Since there are several cost-limiting steps, however, we started exploring sources for additional funding, such as this competition. We have established the following financial projections for 5 years after our device becomes commercially available. Taking these estimates into account, we will be net positive in year 3, and given the current technical stage of our product, if we receive the necessary funds, we plan to enter the commercialization process in 2024, at which point we will begin marketing our solution. As an adjunct to our previously discussed business model, we are considering partnering with existing companies to license the consumable components of our solution. Such companies include Epic and Nonin Medical. Those companies would then handle the marketing, production, and distribution channels we mentioned earlier. Our team is a group of undergraduate students studying biomedical engineering, applied math, and computer science. Members of our team have technical skills in coding, circuit design, and optics, as well as prior experience in startups and grant writing. We are supported by several clinicians and experts in assistive airway devices who provide insight into usability, adaptability, and feasibility. We believe with the support of our advisors and our skills, we can handle challenges down the road. Thank you for listening, and are there any questions?
I have a question. So could you talk a little bit more about what the sensor actually is, and do you have a way that for how it's packaged at the end of that endotracheal tube is not going to be adding a lot of extra bulk or making it more difficult to actually intubate the patient?
Yeah, so actually some of the feedback we did receive from clinicians is that they would be really worried to use a device that was cumbersome or difficult to handle. That's actually one of the main shortcomings with SonarMed, one of the solutions we discussed. So we've designed our solution so that the modifications to the tube add very negligible weight to the device and really don't change any of the usability of the device. And we'll confirm that with our user study, which was originally scheduled for next week, but it'll now be in the fall.
I have a question on the technical side as well. So the transducer position is in reference to where the patch is. How do you register the patch location so that you know ultimately where the transducer is relative to the anatomy? Are you taking an X-ray with the patch on? How does that work?
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Yes. So the intention is for the adhesive that there would be like a radio opaque window that you would see on the X-ray, so that would help the clinician line up the sensor patch.
I have a question as well, and this is to do with more of your sales model. So you mentioned you're trying to work out licensing deals for the disposable components of your system, and you did address your software and how it's going to be on a subscription basis. but you also had some non-disposable components of your system, that central block that connects all the disposables together. How do you envision, managing production, manufacturing, sales of that specific component?
I think that if we aren't able to manufacture it on our own, we would follow a similar approach where we license out manufacturing to other companies that already produce electronics used in neonatal or pediatric patients.
So I have a follow-up question on that in that case. So if a clinician was to buy the system, do you anticipate they would go to 3 or 4 different vendors for it? So one person for the disposables, to you or another manufacturer for, say, the non-disposable components, and then to you for the software subscription, or how would you package all of it together?
Well, a lot of the components in our solution concept are very similar or integrated into existing technology in the NICU. So likely they wouldn't have to be going to new manufacturers. They could rely on their current manufacturers that are providing technology already in use to simplify that process.
Okay, sounds good.
And on your competitive matrix, what I didn't see was cost competition. So part of value assessment going into a hospital is the technical performance kind of weighed against what the cost is. So how do you stack up against, for example, SonarMed and the existing solutions? What's the return on investment for the hospital for using this per case?
Yeah, so as far as like cost, most hospitals already have like X-ray and the Untitled CO2 device. But as far as SonarMed, from what we've discussed with certain stakeholders who have been using the device, it costs about $5,000 for the computing unit that would display kind of information that their sensor is picking up. However, their sensor is disposable, and it costs like about 400, and it needs to be replaced every 2 to 4 weeks, and it obviously can't be used for different patients.
So I know you guys added to, if the extend state is the $60,000 more per case, can spread across all cases that require intubation, or is that only when something goes wrong?
Sorry, my audio cut out a little bit. Would you mind repeating the question?
Yeah, I think you guys presented about $60,000 cost increase per case. Is that the overall cost spread across all cases that require intubation, or is that added cost just for when things go wrong?
That's a cost per patient when the tube is malpositioned at some point during the intubation. So the tube could come out or be pushed too deep. And based on the market research we've done, we found that on average, that increases the cost of one patient stay by $60,000.
So I have a question, guys. Great presentation. Thank you. One thought perhaps to address the exchange with Damini. You guys might want to consider a white label type of situation with respect to some of the components that you're not necessarily sure from a business standpoint, that you're not necessarily sure you'd like to manufacture in-house. I think it's important from both a branding and a business model perspective that it's consolidated, and that your customers and your channel partners are confident that they're going to a single source with support for something as critical as this type of product. My question is actually, if you don't mind, just going back to the technical, and I apologize if I missed this. Is this an electrical? Is the placement and the movement detected using electrical stimulation? Exactly how does that work without divulging your IP?
Yeah, so that's kind of the difficult part because it is our IP, kind of the mechanism of how it works. But just essentially, the tube is hooked up to something that will produce a signal emitted from the tip of the tube that can then be tracked by the sensor patch externally.
Okay, and